Welcome to Ben's Jazz Kitchen, a name so misleading it might just stick. See, the jazz, or the improvising, is normally done in the kitchen long before I do these videos. However, today is a little bit different. Now, I'm Ben, and this is a recipe that kind of just made up on the spot using a lot of extra ingredients I had laying around. So this one is truly the jazz kitchen on camera here. So I looked around inside my fridge and I had nearly every single ingredient to make one of my favorite dishes, and I just want to combine that with this calzone and see what it tastes like. Now that dish I'm talking about is a French vegetable Tian, which is basically you take stacks of discs of vegetables, if that makes any sense, and you loop them around or you wrap them around inside of this giant bowl and you cook it covered in an oven in its own juices for about 45 minutes or so. And when it's done, you have, I guess, what's traditionally a side dish, but in our house, we just cook it as a main dish. It's so tasty, it's very healthy, and it's just packed full of vegetables. But I want to take that and kind of adapt it to fit inside of a calzone. That way I'm not just making yet another pizza, and it'll be something fun to do. So this recipe is for 4 vegetable Tian calzones. Now here's what you're going to need for this recipe. 1 Trader Joe's dough, half of a white onion, 1 white potato, 2 garlic cloves, 2 medium tomatoes, a yellow squash, a zucchini, about 3 ounces of mozzarella cheese, 3 ounces of Gruyere cheese, some olive oil, salt, pepper, dried rosemary, or if you don't have dried rosemary, you can also use Italian seasoning. As an option, I have some Parmesan to sprinkle on top afterwards, which actually turned out to be more of a mistake, but we'll get into that when we get to that part. Now first things first, let's take the Trader Joe's dough out of the fridge, let it thaw on the counter for about 30 to 45 minutes. Let's also preheat our oven to 500 degrees. Now there is quite a bit of prep work for this dish, whether you're making the traditional vegetable Tian or this adaptation of this calzone Tian. So you're gonna have to work pretty diligently to fit everything into that 45-minute window. If you're not so confident, you could start doing all the prep on the vegetables, and then once everything's done, let it sit there on the counter, then take the dough out and sit around for 30 minutes until you're ready to assemble everything. So let's take our half white onion and chop it into 1/2-inch squares. Take our 2 cloves of garlic, mince those up. Now I'm going to chop up my zucchini and my yellow squash. Now in a traditional vegetable Tian, everything is cut into discs and stacked and wrapped around inside the dish. I'm going to break it up here a little bit because I don't want to have 2 stacks of vegetables inside each calzone. I think it'll just cook weird and look a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is actually chop the zucchinis into slivers, and that way I can stuff them in where I need to in these calzones. I used a mandolin, which is the most dangerous machine in the kitchen, but whatever you do, just be careful. Now for the tomatoes, I want to slice these into thin slices as well. Now if you remember, we're making 4 calzones, and I estimate it's going to be about 3 slices of tomato per calzone, or 12 slices total. After you slice these up, stick them on some paper towels to draw out some of that excess moisture. Next, we're going to chop our potato into thin slices as well. You can see that these slices are just a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, but less than 1/4 of an inch. And remember, you're going to need about 2 or 3 of these slices per calzone also, or somewhere around 8 to 12 slices total. Now we move on to our cheese. For the cheese, let's take about 3 ounces of mozzarella and chop it into thin slices. We're going to use these as a base layer in our calzone to keep the juices from permeating and making those calzones stick to whatever pan we're cooking them on. Somebody messed up the footage of me chopping up the mozzarella. It was me. But you can see how thin these slices look. For the Gruyere cheese, we're going to take about 2.5 to 3 ounces of this, and I'm going to grate it real small. All right, now for the food prep. We're going to do a little bit of pre-cooking before we assemble these calzones. And the reason we're doing that is because we have different times for these vegetables. See, in a traditional vegetable Tian, the potatoes would cook in their juices in the oven for about 45 minutes. We don't have 45 minutes because that Trader Joe's dough is going to look like charcoal if we stick that in there for nearly an hour. So we want to pre-cook these potatoes, not so much that they are done all the way, but enough so that the additional 10 or 15 minutes in the oven in the calzone will kind of finish the job off. So let's take our discs of the potato and stick them on a pre-greased non-stick pan. Then let's brush some olive oil on top, crack some pepper and salt over them, and sprinkle some rosemary. Now stick them in the air fryer at about 350 degrees for around 8 to 10 minutes. What we're looking for is the tops of these potatoes to maybe start to bubble, brown a little bit, but not look so cooked that they're like thick chips. When the potatoes are done, let's take them out and put them on a tray and set them to the side. Now for the onions, we're going to take 2 teaspoons of olive oil, stick it in a pan, and heat it up until it's nice and shiny. Add the onions in there, cook them for about 4 or 5 minutes, stirring occasionally, and just saute them until they have a nice translucent look to them. After about 5 minutes, add in the minced garlic, stirring it for about another minute or 2, and then take that off and stick it inside of a bowl and set it to the side. Now, I would recommend getting the onions started as soon as the potatoes are in the air fryer, and you should be able to finish the onions up just before the potatoes are done cooking. For the squash mixture, let's take a frying pan and stick in a half of a teaspoon, maybe a teaspoon and a half of olive oil. Let that heat up, then add the squash into it with a pinch of salt to draw out some of the moisture, and just cook it up until you get a little bit of browning on those vegetables. Not too much, but as you can see here, there's just a little bit of brown discoloration on a few pieces. When that's done, take them off, stick them in a bowl, and set it to the side. Now it's time to assemble these. We're going to divide our Trader Joe's dough into 4 4-ounce balls. My Trader Joe's dough was a little bit shy of the 16 ounces that it says it has, but I was able to get 3 4-ounce balls and 1 3 7/8 ball. We're going to use a rolling pin and turn these balls into about an 8-inch circle. Now the first thing we're going to do is take our mozzarella slices and lay down a base layer, nothing too thick, just one side by side, until we cover about half of that circle, but keeping it an inch from the edge, as you can see here. Then I want to top it with our onion garlic mixture, just a little bit there to spread it out. Then I'm going to put my potatoes on top, covering the whole layers of cheese there, whether it's 2 pieces of potato or 3, but just make sure you cover that whole entirety of onions and cheese there. Then I'm going to take tomatoes, cover the potatoes with those, 2 to 3 slices depending on how thick they are. Then I'm going to take some of that zucchini mixture and just stuff it on top and where you imagine there might be some air pockets when you fold this calzone over. Last, I'm going to take about 3/4 of an ounce of that thinly grated Gruyere cheese and also put that on top. I'm going to crack some pepper, put a little bit more dried rosemary on top, and then fold it over itself. Now what I want to do is pinch the edges together. You can either take the dough and twist it as you go around, which is kind of how you get that traditional calzone look. In this case, I'm using a fork and just forcing it down till the 2 sides merge and won't separate. I think it's easier to do, especially if you're not used to doing the little twist. Whatever works for you though, I'm sure it'll be fine. Just make sure it's nice and sealed. When that's done, I'm going to take the fork, poke a couple holes in the top of these calzones. I'm going to take a little bit of additional olive oil and just spread it around the top to keep the top so it crisps up just a little bit. Now it's time to cook these up. Now I mentioned preheating your oven to 500 degrees earlier. I had intentions of using the air fryer, but I noticed that when I did stick them in my air fryer and cooked it for a few minutes, the front calzone closest to the glass actually started to really cook up a lot faster than the others. So after about 3 or 4 minutes where that first calzone was really darkened, I took them out, stuck them in the oven, which thankfully I did preheat it, and I cooked them on a pizza steel for about 8 to 10 additional minutes. So I would omit the air fryer altogether, go straight to the oven. I think it just has a bigger space for the air to circulate and cook evenly. Go straight to the oven on a pan or a steel and cook them for somewhere around 10 to 12 minutes until the tops have a nice even brown. The bottoms look nice and evenly cooked as well. Once you hit that point, and if you've cooked pizza dough or calzones before, you'll know when it's got that nice golden look to it. Take them out. You don't want to overcook these, of course. Let them sit on the counter for about 5 minutes to finish cooking, and some of the dough will soften up as the moisture is released from the vegetables. And that's kind of it. These are ready to eat. Now, this is where I messed up. I thought I could grate the Parmesan on top as soon as I took them out of the oven and it would magically blend with the hot dough. And instead, the dough was already cooked, so the Parmesan just kind of hardened into these little chunks and they just scraped off really easily. So if you do want to add Parmesan, I would put that on before you stick them in the oven to bake. That way it definitely becomes one with the dough and maybe looks more like the top of the Asiago bread at Subway or something. All right, now I'm gonna get to eating these, talking about them and all that stuff, so I will see you in a bit. Well, here we are. This is the vegetable Tian calzone. Like I said, I have not made this before, so this is a new experience for me. The calzone bread itself seemed to cook up just fine, and I wasn't too worried about that other than the age of this Trader Joe's dough. But otherwise, it looks good. We'll see how the flavors merge together. I mean, Tians can have a lot of the similar vegetables that you'd find on a pizza or in a calzone, like the onions, the tomatoes, zucchini, sometimes there's squash. And then when it comes to the cheese, you've got the mozzarella as well, and this one's a little bit different because it's more of a 50-50 blend of the mozzarella and the Gruyere cheese, but I think it's going to go together pretty well. My only concerns are, is it going to be too dry because there's not a sauce base? Will the potato that's in there really go with the fact that it's also in a bread loaf? I don't know if that's going to be too much of that starchiness. You know, I mean, I guess you can buy pupusas and empanadas stuffed with mashed potatoes, so maybe this will be kind of like that. Another difference between a traditional vegetable Tian and this calzone is they might use a sweeter yellow onion to saute up for the base flavors of that dish, whereas I decided to use a white onion because I had it on hand, and I figured it kind of blended the calzone and the Tian a little bit better, like it was a true merger of the two flavors. So anyway, let's cut this thing open and give it a taste. I can tell you immediately I'm not so pleased with the Parmesan sprinkle on the top. But anyway, here's what the inside of this thing looks like. It smells fantastic. I can pick up some of the vegetables in there, the rosemary. Definitely curious how this is going to taste. It doesn't seem to be too wet. I mean, it's actually almost perfect there considering it was done in a household oven. So here's a bite with all of the insides in it. I can see the potato, the cheeses. Still seems really hot. First thing you meet is the onions, which have that nice sweetness because you saute them for about 6-7 minutes or so. And then you've got a little bit of that garlicky bite to it, which is immediately met with that rosemary. Now I did use dried rosemary, whereas I normally use a fresh rosemary, but it seemed to have worked fine in this. And that's probably because it was cooking in those juices and permeating the entire insides of this pocket here. I will say I don't think the potato is as noticeable. You could probably do without it in this recipe. It's more acting as like an extension of the bread. So if you wanted to cut out some starch, I don't think you'd really notice it too much. Maybe it absorbed some of the rosemary, or in my head I just think of potatoes and rosemary, and maybe that's the magical combination. I don't know. I'd try it without them though, just to see if there was a difference. And then you get into that 1-2-3 combo of the tomato, the zucchini, the squash, and that's really what has all the juice that you need to really hold this dish together so you can just eat it as it is. I was thinking it might be on the cusp of being too dry without a marinara or some sort of maybe a garlic cream base or something, but I think it does work like this. If I make it again, I might just make a dipping sauce or maybe put marinara in one of them and see how it goes. But I really did want to blend a traditional vegetable Tian with a calzone and see if I could make those flavors work. The next layer we get to is the Gruyere cheese, which, you know, if you've had that cheese before, it's my personal favorite. I think it's one of the best flavored cheeses in the world, and you get that right at the end of this thing, which overall I think this is a winner, and I'm going to graduate it from the Jazz Kitchen Trials to the official recipe book. Now, if you have any suggestions about what other toppings might go good inside of this calzone, or maybe even some other unique calzone recipes, certainly interested in trying them out. I only have a few criteria. One of them is I'm allergic to mushrooms, and I don't eat meat, but if you got any suggestions, I'm all ears. Let me know what you think about this recipe, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you like this, consider clicking the like button, or even better, subscribing, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!